Welcome to this 365 Freedom Strategy session. Today we're breaking down the mechanics of consistent processes and why your biggest business bottleneck is your reliance on mental effort.
Yeah, and it's a bottleneck that, honestly, most founders don't even realize is there.
Exactly. I mean, let's set the stage for you, the listener. Picture this. It's 10:00 a.m. on a Tuesday.
A classic Tuesday morning.
Right. You sit down at your desk to write your weekly newsletter, and this is something you've done dozens of times before.
Hundreds of times, probably.
Yeah, but instead of just typing, you spend like 20 minutes trying to remember where you saved last week's template.
Oh, and trying to remember what specific font size you use for your subheaders.
Yes, or what the UTM tracking code is for your call to action link. It's maddening.
It really is.
And before you've written a single word of actual content, you're just exhausted. You're staring at the screen, feeling this heavy, invisible friction.
And that's when you start telling yourself you're just not feeling inspired today.
Right, the old I lack inspiration excuse.
But that invisible friction is, it's the silent killer of independent businesses.
It really is. We spend so much time, analyzing revenue streams and marketing funnels.
Conversion rates, algorithms, we assume the bottleneck is always external.
Exactly. But when we look at the actual operational architecture of a creator's day-to-day life, the most severe constraint is internal.
Because you are using highly valuable mental real estate to store, mundane procedural information.
Just to store the basic steps.
Right. You're waking up and essentially trying to rebuild the operational scaffolding of your entire business from scratch in your mind every single day.
I used to think I was just naturally lazy because I couldn't get myself to do my Friday bookkeeping.
Bookkeeping is the classic example.
It is. I'd procrastinate all week, just dreading it.
But you weren't dreading the actual math, were you?
No. I realized I wasn't dreading the math at all. I was dreading the fact that every Friday, I had to figure out how to log into the software again.
Relearn the interface.
Yeah, remember which specific reports to pull and, recall how to categorize 3 different types of recurring expenses.
You were mentally rebuilding the entire process from memory.
Every single week. And the toll that takes on a founder is just massive.
It's huge. And it leads directly to this feast or famine cycle we see so often.
Right. Let's talk about that cycle.
Well, the feast or famine cycle is the defining characteristic of what we call the motivation-based approach.
The motivation-based creator.
Exactly. We have this micro story in our materials about a creator who lived in this exact cycle.
Oh, I remember this one.
Yeah, on days when she felt inspired, her output was just phenomenal.
She felt unstoppable.
Right. The work poured out of her. The business moved forward rapidly. But on tired days...
Or days with, a slight headache.
Or just an unexpected email throwing off her morning. On those days, absolutely nothing got done.
Her whole business just ground to a halt. It's like, okay, relying on motivation to run your business is kind of like trying to cross an ocean in a sailing ship, but refusing to build an engine.
That is a perfect analogy.
Right. You're just sitting on the deck waiting for a gust of wind.
And when the wind blows, it's glorious.
It's so fast. It's quiet. It feels entirely natural and effortless. You feel like a genius navigator.
But when the wind dies down,
you're just stranded in the doldrums. You sit there completely frustrated, wondering why you aren't moving forward.
And worse, you start blaming yourself for the lack of wind.
Yes. You start thinking, oh, I just lack discipline or I don't have enough drive.
Which is completely unfair to yourself. Blaming yourself is the default reaction, but motivation is fundamentally a biochemical state.
Right. It's not a character trait.
Exactly. It's a transient emotion. It's heavily influenced by dopamine levels, cortisol, your blood sugar.
Yeah.
100 other external variables that are completely outside your control.
So why do we do it? Why do we, as creators and founders, so often conflate feeling inspired with having a process?
Because when founders experience that incredible high of a motivated day, they anchor to it.
It feels so good.
It feels amazing. And they start believing that this heightened emotional state is a prerequisite for doing the work.
Wow. So they effectively subordinate their long-term business goals to their daily emotional fluctuations.
That's exactly what happens.
But wait, I'm going to push back here for a second. Isn't that initial burst of unbridled passion exactly what built the business in the first place?
Yes, it is.
So if I start mechanizing everything and removing the emotion from the equation, don't I lose the soul of the work?
I hear this all the time.
The whole reason most of us started our own businesses was to escape that rigid, mechanized corporate structure, right?
Right. We want to operate on inspiration. But that exact desire to escape the corporate machine is what traps founders in this cycle,
How so?
because we have to separate the energy required to start a project from the energy required to sustain it.
Oh, that's a huge distinction.
Getting a business off the ground requires a monumental, almost irrational push.
It totally requires inspiration.
But running a business week after week requires administration.
Yeah, that's true.
If you demand that your brain supply startup levels of inspiration just to publish a weekly update or, send an invoice, you will burn out.
You're just setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly. Consistency isn't a personality trait. It's a byproduct of structure.
So when you lack structure, of course it's hard to move when the wind isn't blowing.
Precisely. You're relying entirely on the wind.
Okay, so if waiting for motivation is the symptom, the actual disease is this cognitive load, right?
Yes, holding the entire business in our heads.
So if my brain's RAM is getting wiped by trying to remember all these administrative steps, is that why I'm reaching for like a sugary coffee by 2:00 p.m.?
Absolutely.
Because we read this phrase in the materials that really stood out. Every repeated task becomes a new decision.
That's a powerful phrase.
It really implies a literal biological cost to an undocumented workflow.
And there is a severe biological cost. Cognitive science clearly demonstrates that our capacity to make decisions is a finite daily resource.
It's not unlimited.
Not at all. Every time you approach an undocumented task, you aren't just doing the work. You are initiating a complex sequence of retrieval operations.
Like, what's the first step?
Right. Where did I save that asset? Who needs to approve this?
Those aren't just passing thoughts.
No, they are micro-decisions. And the prefrontal cortex, which handles executive function and decision-making, requires immense amounts of glucose to operate.
Wait, really? So you are literally draining your biological battery just trying to remember how to begin?
Literally, you are burning physical energy before the actual work even starts.
It's like you're essentially forcing yourself to rewrite the recipe from scratch every time you want to bake a cake.
Yes, exactly.
It's this compounding tax of fresh thought, fresh memory, fresh effort.
It's exhausting.
Like, if you want to bake a chocolate cake, the creative part is decorating it, right? Maybe experimenting with a new type of icing.
That's the fun part.
But the administrative part is just knowing you need 2 cups of flour and 3 eggs.
Right.
If you have to sit down and scientifically deduce the ratio of flour to eggs from memory every single time you enter the kitchen, you're never going to get around to the creative decoration.
You'll be way too exhausted from reinventing the batter.
Exactly.
And that exhaustion often masquerades as laziness.
Oh, that's so interesting. Say more about that.
Well, this is where we see the concept of operational friction.
Okay.
In mechanical engineering, friction is resistance that generates heat and slows the system down.
Right.
In a business, cognitive friction feels like procrastination.
Wow.
You look at your to-do list, you see a routine task, and you feel this massive waves of resistance.
And you just assume you're too tired to do the task.
Exactly. But in reality, you aren't too tired to do the work. You're too tired to endure the friction of remembering how to do the work.
That is a massive paradigm shift. But I know exactly what a lot of founders are screaming at their dashboards right now while they listen to this.
Oh, I'm sure you do.
They're saying, I've been running this business for 3 years. I know my business inside and out. I know how to upload a video. I know how to onboard a client.
It's practically second nature.
Exactly. I don't need to write it down because I already know it. How do you respond to that?
I'd say that knowing something and recalling it under pressure are two entirely different neurological processes.
Okay, break that down for us.
Information stored in your long-term memory is like having a file buried somewhere in a massive disorganized warehouse.
Okay, so the information is definitely in there somewhere.
Yes, the information exists, but to actually execute the task, your brain has to locate that specific file, pull it out, and place it on your working memory disk.
Ah, the working memory disk.
And working memory is incredibly limited.
So working memory isn't the massive warehouse or the filing cabinet. It's just a tiny physical desk. And if your desk is completely covered in sticky notes, reminding you how to format a blog post, what the image dimensions need to be, which tags to use,
then there's literally no physical room left on the desk to actually write the blog post.
that makes perfect sense.
That's the exact bottleneck. And we have to remember that memory is highly fallible under stress.
Right, because on a perfect day,
When you're fully rested and highly motivated,
your brain might locate all those files instantly. Your recall is flawless.
But what happens on a Tuesday when you slept poorly? Or a client sent an angry email.
Or your kid is homesick from school.
Right. Your working memory capacity just plummets.
And suddenly, that client onboarding sequence you claim to know inside and out feels overwhelmingly complex.
You forget to send the intake form.
You make a minor, embarrassing error.
And the friction spikes.
Which leads right into what we call the squeaky floorboard problem.
Oh, the squeaky floorboard.
An undocumented process is like a squeaky floorboard in your hallway. You walk over it every single day.
And every day it annoys you.
Every single day. And every day you have to actively remember to step slightly to the left to avoid the squeak.
It takes a tiny bit of focus every single time.
And your only strategy for dealing with it is willpower. You just try to force yourself to remember to step to the left.
But willpower is the absolute worst tool for long-term consistency.
It really is. The materials draw a hard line here. They say consistency rarely comes from willpower. It comes from structure that supports you.
Because willpower is an internal biological force.
It's finite.
Very finite. It requires high energy, emotional regulation, and immense internal pressure.
You have to actively suppress your desire to do something easier.
It's internal combat, really.
It's like carrying water in your bare hands.
That's a great way to look at it.
You can do it if you're desperate, right?
Yeah.
You cup your hands together, you squeeze your fingers really tight, and you walk incredibly slowly.
But it takes all your focus.
Your hands cramp. You're definitely going to spill some water along the way.
And you certainly can't carry enough water to sustain a village.
Exactly, and that's trying to run a business on willpower. Whereas documentation is building a pipe.
Yes.
Once the pipe is laid, you don't have to clench your muscles anymore. You just turn a valve and the structure does the heavy lifting.
The water flows regardless of whether you're tired, angry, or uninspired.
Because a pipe is an external, infinite resource.
It doesn't fatigue. It doesn't have a bad day.
It removes uncertainty completely.
When you have a documented process telling you step 1, step 2, step 3, you are radically reducing the volume of decision-making required.
So if building a pipe is so clearly, technically, and strategically superior to carrying water in our hand,
Which it is.
then why do smart, highly capable founders resist it so fiercely?
That is the million-dollar question.
I mean, if I know my Instagram strategy might change next month because of a new algorithm update, haven't I just wasted hours documenting a dead process?
A lot of people think that.
Isn't that a highly logical reason to just keep things fluid in my head?
It sounds logical, but the perceived risk of a process changing is usually a smokescreen for deeper psychological blocks.
Really? Like what?
Well, first, there's an intense action bias. Founders feel productive when they're moving fast, checking boxes, and executing.
Right, getting things done.
Stopping to document a workflow feels tedious. It feels like slowing down.
So they look at a task and think, I could just finish this in 10 minutes right now, or I could spend 30 minutes writing down how to do it.
Exactly, and I don't have 30 extra minutes.
They prioritize the immediate present while entirely ignoring the compounding future cost of their memory reliance.
They're too busy mopping the floor to turn off the overflowing sink.
Oh, that's exactly it.
Furthermore, there's a significant ego component.
Oh, ego. How does that play into it?
Many creators secretly pride themselves on being the singular linchpin of their operation.
Like they're the only one who could possibly do it.
Right. Holding the entire architecture of the business in their head makes them feel indispensable.
I can see that.
Documenting the process demystifies their quote-unquote art. It turns their creative magic into a sequence of reproducible steps.
And there's a subconscious resistance to that vulnerability.
Absolutely. If the steps are on paper, maybe they aren't as uniquely vital as they thought.
That's a terrifying thought for a visionary founder. If my genius is just a 10-step checklist, what makes me special?
But it's a necessary hurdle to cross.
And the creator in our microstory pushed past that ego, didn't she?
She did. And she didn't do it by building a massive corporate wiki.
She didn't hire an operations manager?
No, she just created a simple checklist for one single repeated task.
And the materials emphasize that the change was immediate. The checklist held the structure.
They state, consistency becomes natural when your system carries the rhythm for you.
The word rhythm is critical here, isn't it?
It's everything. When you run a business from memory and willpower, your rhythm is erratic. It's chaotic.
1 week you publish 3 videos, the next week you publish 0 because you're recovering from the sprint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But a documented checklist acts as a metronome for the business.
I love the metronome analogy. A metronome provides an external, objective baseline of time.
Right.
When a musician plays with a metronome, they don't have to expend any mental energy trying to keep the tempo.
The device holds the tempo.
And this frees the musician's cognitive capacity to focus entirely on the phrasing, the dynamics, the expression, the actual soul of the performance.
Which is exactly what we want for a founder. When the checklist holds the rhythm, the founder no longer has to set the pace or actively remember the sequence.
So it just follows the beat.
And this directly addresses the fear that documentation destroys creativity.
Well, I want to push on that because checklists sound incredibly bureaucratic to a highly creative person.
They do. They sound rigid.
They sound like a straitjacket. A graphic designer or a writer might argue that their entire value proposition is their ability to make spontaneous, intuitive decisions.
Sure.
So how does removing the need to make decisions actually create more freedom for a creator rather than restricting them?
Because freedom doesn't exist in a vacuum of structure. True creative freedom actually thrives within constraints.
Okay, unpack that.
Systematizing the routine is what humanizes the exception. By delegating all the mundane, repetitive decisions to a checklist.
Like how to name the file.
Where to upload it, who to tag you, create a fortress of cognitive bandwidth.
A fortress.
Yes. You are fiercely protecting your creative energy. The checklist handles the how, so your mind can completely immerse itself in the what and the why.
So it's not a straitjacket.
Not at all. It's the ultimate liberation for a creative mind.
The checklist is a fortress protecting your creative bandwidth. I really love that.
It changes everything once you see it that way.
But if we accept that a checklist acts as this protective fortress, the immediate problem becomes implementation.
It always comes down to implementation.
Because the instinct for a high achiever isn't to make one checklist, is it?
No, their instinct is to spend an entire weekend mapping out the entire enterprise.
Getting completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of undocumented processes?
And then abandoning the whole concept by Monday morning.
Which defeats the purpose.
Attempting to document the entire business at once is a classic self-sabotage tactic.
It just creates a monumental project.
A project that requires a massive amount of willpower to complete, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid.
So what's the strategy then?
The strategy here requires severe restraint. The directive from our sources is highly specific.
What does it say?
Choose one task you repeat often. Write out the steps. Keep it simple. Let your mind rest.
Let's workshop this right now, practically speaking.
Okay, let's do it.
If a listener is sitting at their desk, how granular should this first checklist be? Like, if my task is publish the weekly podcast, is step 1 open the laptop?
No, it feels ridiculous.
Right. But if step 1 is edit the audio, that's way too broad.
Exactly.
So where is the Goldilocks zone for a checklist?
The Goldilocks zone is defined by your points of friction. You don't need to document the things your brain does automatically without effort.
Like opening the laptop.
Right. You document the points where you normally have to pause and search your memory.
Okay.
For a podcast, edit the audio is too broad because editing is a creative, fluid process.
Yeah.
But apply the standard vocal EQ preset, export as a WAV file at -16 LUFS, and save to the client deliverables folder. Now that is a perfect checklist item.
Because it removes a cluster of technical micro decisions?
Precisely.
So you aren't documenting the creative act itself, you're documenting the administrative wrapper around the creative act.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it, the administrative wrapper.
Like, if I'm a newsletter writer, my checklist doesn't say, write a funny intro.
No, that requires inspiration.
But it does say, duplicate last week's template in MailChimp, update the subject line placeholder, insert the sponsorship banner at 600 pixels wide, and send a test email to myself.
Yes, and by starting with just one highly repetitive task, you bypass the massive resistance to documentation.
If you aren't overhauling your business, you're just fixing one squeaky floorboard.
Exactly. So we ask the listener, what task do you perform every week that consistently makes you sigh before you start it?
What is the task where you frequently make small, frustrating errors because you forgot a minor detail?
That's where you start.
Find the task that causes the most dread, not because it's inherently hard, but just because it's annoying to remember.
You write out the steps.
You keep it simple.
And you're just laying down the first piece of track so the train can run smoothly tomorrow without needing a massive engine of willpower to push it forward.
And the material promises a very specific emotional outcome from this shift. It promises the kind of consistency that feels calm.
Calm. And in the context of running an independent business, calm isn't a passive state.
It's not about being sleepy.
No, calm is a state of deep control. Calm is the absence of that frantic, panic background noise of, what am I forgetting?
That low-level anxiety that's always running in the background.
Right. The ultimate objective is shifting the burden of the business from the founder's fragile working memory to a documented system.
Giving the mind the rest it requires to function at an elite level.
Because a rested mind is a strategic advantage.
It really is. A mind that is constantly buzzing with undocumented operational details cannot engage in deep work.
It can't spot macro trends in the market.
It can't innovate. You're too busy trying to remember if you sent the invoice to notice that your entire industry is shifting directions.
But when the system holds the rhythm,
When you have that metronome.
the mind is allowed to step back from tactical, ground-level execution and assume its rightful role in strategic oversight.
And that is the origin of calm consistency.
It's the profound confidence of knowing that the baseline operations of your business are secured by structure, not by your fleeting daily enthusiasm.
Because a professional doesn't rely on inspiration to execute their standard operating procedures.
They rely on their systems.
Motivation is a wonderful guest, but a terrible boss.
I absolutely agree with that.
Think about it this way. What if your business's growth isn't limited by your talent, your drive, or your ideas?
What if that's not the bottleneck at all?
Right. What if your bottleneck has absolutely nothing to do with your capability, but is simply caused by the sheer crushing weight of what you are trying to hold in your head every single day?
It's a heavy burden to carry.
Imagine what your mind could build. Imagine the vision you could execute. If your brain wasn't so exhausted from just trying to remember how to run the machine.
That's the real freedom we're talking about.
If you're ready to build steadier processes and give your mind the rest it deserves, visit 365 Freedom online to join the community. This has been a 365 Freedom Strategy Session.